Hi, and welcome to Draft and Compliance. I'm Kane, he's Tom, and we talked with Matt from Celebrite last time. Today, we're talking with our special guest, James Leach. But before we get to that, we have some beers. What are we drinking today, James?
Well, today we're going to be drinking Fat Tire. It's definitely more of a more well-known, maybe top 20 craft brew. But yeah, I'm excited to try it out and walk through it.
Yeah, this
would be I think I've seen stickers for this in my hometown on the back of green Subarus, which is kind of the national car of Washington State.
I'll be honest with you. I could not find it in a bottle. So this is the first time I've ever drank this out of a can. So that'll be at least a new experience. But I've drank lots of Fat Tire. And James, as you indicated, this one, I'm cracking it, by the way. This is a beer that
that's messy.
Has been around the craft scene probably longer than maybe just about anything that I have around here. Probably ties with Blue Moon, the only other one.
Yeah.
Certainly a much different beer than Blue Moon. So
Blue Moon is the one that gets served with an orange slice, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
I do know my beers. And mostly I'm wondering like if it was a cocktail. No, I put way too much head on that.
Let me give you a quick... No, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Let me give you a quick rundown of the business side of the brew, because that's what I do. So I like to draw parallels with the beer. Sure. Flat Tire is owned by New Belgium Brewing Company. They started in 1991. They've been in business for almost 26 years before they were a global distributor, distributing in 50 U.S. states. They have about 480 employees and about 180 million in sales, based out of Fort Collins. Cool story with Flat Tire is one of the co-founders traveled through Europe, hopping from brewery to brewery, looking for inspiration. But of course, his bike had a fat tire. And, that's kind of where the story came from. He drew a lot of commentary and inspiration from that. So hence their flagship beer came from his journeys in Europe.
Huh.
That's awesome.
Well, thank you for the history of this one.
What's interesting to me is I would say New Belgium is known more for their Voodoo Ranger today than their Fat Tire.
Oh, we've had that, haven't we?
Yeah.
Ew.
Which is their IPA flagship.
Yeah, that was terrible.
Certainly Fat Tire came first. And by the way, James, Kane finds nothing delicious. So
I find things delicious that are not beer.
All right, let's smell it real quick.
Yeah, it's
Kane, I'm always interested.
So the funny thing about this is that I'm wondering if my nose is broken today, because this doesn't have a very prominent smell to it. It's pretty faint on the nose. There's there's obviously wheat and beer, but also there's kind of a banana undertone.
Yeah,
Are you getting that?
I get it. I get the grainy, bready smell and a little caramely.
A little malt presence. Yep.
Yeah, you can definitely smell the malt. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, let's give it a sip. Why wait any longer? I think it's interesting. The head is almost dissipated.
Yeah, exactly. It's not very bubbly either, I'm noticing.
More of a fruity hop.
It's really good. It's first of all, it doesn't overpower you with the hop. So
right.
Those who don't like the hoppy beers, this would be something you might want to try. Certainly got a caramely, almost sweetness on the let's say on the backside of it. But I don't know. What do you taste, Kane? What do you think?
It's another one of those that I'm kind of thinking it's inoffensive more than anything else. It doesn't have a strong flavor profile. I like, Tom, I like big, bold red wines. I like things that are like Scotch that are really unusual and diverse. And this is, it tastes like beer. It's not, we've had something like this on the show before where I remember thinking like, this tastes like teenage disappointment.
Yeah, that might be.
It doesn't sail. I mean, it's got a little bit of a sour edge to it, but I mean, so does all beer. Not a lot of sweet.
I would call this sessionable. I mean, to me, this is an easy beer to drink. I think it's really good. So, I think it has a different kind of quality than many of the beers that we've tried, Kane. So, what you're not tasting
I was thinking of your comment, sessionable. when I was up at closing day at Baker a few weeks ago and watched the guys on the chair with me each put down a 6-pack of Ronier. For those of you who aren't in Washington State, that's our national beer of vitamin R. And each of them put away a 6-pack on a 12-minute lift ride.
Yeah.
I think that's sessionable,
Wow.
right, Tom?
Well, yeah, that's a different kind of session than I mean when sessionable, but
Not quite sure how they skied after that either.
Yeah, certainly that is sessionable. So
Supposedly the story is with this beer that they had it was more of a darker amber ale, and then to adjust to the new generation of beer drinkers, they changed the recipe. So it's more of a crisper finish, a lighter type ale than what they originally came up with.
I was going to say, when I first looked at it, I would have guessed. I've never had it out of anything but a bottle.
Yeah, this is
I would have
clear.
guessed it to be a much darker beer. So I was surprised by how much clarity you had in it, and it was more of a gold honey color. But
yeah,
very good. All right, should we?
Yeah, I think we should probably move on to FedRAMP. Yeah, now that we've all got at least a little bit of beer with us. And so, James, all of our questions are going to be around FedRAMP today. I hope Tom lets you know that about the show. And I want you to explain a little bit about the primary responsibles of 3PAOs, third-party assessment organizations, within FedRAMP, and kind of how those responsibilities impact cloud service or cloud security providers.
Sure. So, the FedRAMP program's been around since 2011. The foundation of the independent inspection was, forming a FedRAMP 3POs who are accredited by A2LA. So FedRAMP 3POs are supposed to be the independent inspection arm of the governing body to provide scale to the program and technical capabilities to validate that the control implementation is in place as expected. If we're talking on the assessment side of the house, a 3PO should get involved early in the process. It's important that they understand your business case, they understand the journey that you're going on, and a good 3PO will be able to help you identify some of the pitfalls up front. You're going to see me jump into one of the bigger problems that I see is around the FedRAMP business case for a lot of the discussions that we've had, but ultimately we work with cloud service providers. Many of those were the hyperscaler providers like AWS, Azure, Google, IBM, Oracle. And then, what we're seeing nowadays is more of the ISV community like yourself and other SaaS vendors, platform as a service vendors that are looking to go through it. So we identify a plan through the security assessment plan. We document the scope. We go through the assessment, manual control testing, vulnerability scanning, penetration testing. We work with your collective CSP teams to come up with a draft assessment report. We go through that and review, back and forth in terms of were things identified correctly? Let's weed out the false positives. And ultimately, there's an end buyer involved. That's going to be the agency. They're going to want to see that report. And, from there, they start asking questions. That's when it gets fun. I like this, I don't like that. And you get to a common ground where they believe that they're able to issue an authorization to operate. And that's ultimately the foundation, an ATO. Yes, correct. And,
essentially, James, it sounds like essentially what you're saying is a good 3PAO, like you guys, Fortrim, you partner on sort of the advisory role, but you actually take from advisory all the way through to the final back and forth with the agency and finally an agreement. So you're sort of the steward or the shepherd, with the client as you walk through it.
Yeah, and depending on what role you're serving as a 3PO, you can be either an advisor, which helps CSPs prepare for an actual assessment, or the 3PO assessor. I still believe either one of those roles collectively should be involved in the beginning, so you're all on the same page. Because at the end of the day, you're a collective team, right? We're an independent partner. If I'm your assessor, if you outsource to a third party that helps you prepare for it, you're all one team. We all have different roles and different accountability, but it's important that you're together earlier on in the process.
And I think we've had other guests on who've talked about that early partnership and early engagement with 3PAOs in order to be successful with FedRAMP moderate.
Yeah, I think that's right. I know we've talked with a number of folks that have indicated they've also maybe misstepped at times with when they've included their 3PAO. So
fair point. Yeah. All right, so if that's what a 3PAO at a very high level does for CSPs, what role do 3PAOs play in shaping the FedRAMP requirements and process?
Yeah, when I think back on that, ever since we were involved in the program, and I've been with different 3POs before starting Fortran, it's always been predicated on a collaborative effort, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got the 3POs, which they're the inspection body. You have the FedRAMP PMO. You have the JAB. You have the agencies, and you have the CSP. And there's a lot of different areas that you can work together to contribute, but it's expected that you're contributing to the program, right? Partnering with the FedRAMP PMO is an important element of being a good 3PO, making sure you understand what they're asking for. And as requirements come out that are in the gray area, you're looking to interpret that with them. We don't create policy, we help interpret it, right? There's a lot of different federal agencies out there that you as a 3PO should be building relationships with. And you've got very extreme differences in terms of what their authorization process is, like the VA. For example, they're the top FedRAMP authorizing agency out there, but they have a pretty long process in terms of how to qualify to go through that. You have other federal agencies that have a need, and their review process is a little bit different in terms of how quickly they could be available to, sponsor you or pick up your initial authorization. There's also a lot of advisory boards out there. There's the CSP advisory board. That's an invite only. There's 3PO SIG, where we actually have collaboration with other 3POs to make sure that we are collectively interpreting the guidance. I mean, there's nothing worse than trying to go through an audit and one 3PO says one thing and one says another. So it's important that we are consistent together, right? Nobody likes hearing that somebody got away with something in one situation and didn't with the other. So, and then you have the FSCAC, which is the cloud advisory board that was pointed through OMB, and you have the FedRAMP PMO. So there's a lot of stakeholders. There's a lot of ways to get involved, and it's expected, right? The PMO releases, FedRAMP Rev 5. Guess what? They put draft out for comment. Get involved, weigh in, give your opinions, and even when they, don't take everything that you put out there, give your opinions again and work with your, collective parties to make it a better program.
James, when there's potential conflict in either the language or even the intent, do you guys collectively as 3PA organizations in one of those groups, do you have a way to push back into the FedRAMP PMO?
We do. I would say that with a certain amount of assessment experience, you have history on your side. So when you go through and you have precedents, you're always going to leverage precedents. You're going to make sure that that's communicated within the collective teams that are doing the assessments. But there are cases that guidance may not have been defined as well as you would have liked. So we may go through a 3PO SIG. We may escalate through the FedRAMP PMO. There's a lot of different ways to do that. And it is required at times. Like you have to do it because of the ambiguity of certain requirements. Like I can argue both sides. What's the actual verdict on how this is going to pass or not?
Yeah, and despite all of that industry collaboration, we've actually recently seen some pretty substantial signaling from the White House that FedRAMP needs to change, but we haven't seen any tactical results from that yet. So from where you sit, what changes do you see coming in the next year?
So the first one is at the speed of government. You have to know and expect that things are going to take longer than you want. Nobody, and most of the providers we're working with on the commercial side, it doesn't operate at the pace of government. So, buckle up and get ready. It's going to be a long ride. But ultimately, the government, is very process oriented, and it takes a lot longer than many of us are patient in terms of wanting to see results. The OMB memo that came out about the FedRAMP modernization, that came out in December of this past year. People are wanting, there was a lot of optimism. Certainly if you've been in the program a long time, with the skepticism that you have to kind of work into that. But, some of the things that I think are really important out of that memo was the multiple authorization structures, which while, a single agency is most direct path to get. The hope is that that the program authorization, which if you look back in the FedRAMP program, there used to be this thing called CSP supply path. And what's interesting about the FedRAMP, the program authorization path, that would actually be issued through the FedRAMP PMO. So in theory, one of the top 3 challenges of the program is I need a sponsor. I need somebody to buy my first offering. That's a big deal. Now, my skepticism will kick in because I've been in the program a long time and I have to balance that viewpoint. But to me, that would be one of the greatest things they could do to the program is to give the opportunity to more CSPs to where they don't get stuck in that gauntlet of waiting for a sponsor, waiting for a sponsor, waiting for a sponsor, right?
Yeah, if I read that same language the way you did, it certainly sounds like the government is pushing for something like that. What's interesting to me is how does the push get essentially interpreted by the folks that actually manage the overall FedRAMP program? Because what would be really nice is to see somebody move with some speed here and say, I think the Biden administration acknowledges that the government is falling behind and they're not getting enough folks through the funnel, so to speak. So I would like to see somebody stand up and take that bull by the horns, right? And get something put in place quicker rather than later, rather than at the speed of government. I know that's wishful thinking, James, but that's what I'm looking for.
Right. And, one of the other things that they talked about was, automating the intake and processing of machine readable documentation, which is OSCAL, right? When you think of like OSCAL and what's that potentially going to bring, the one indicator of movement on that space is there was an RFQ that was issued. It was due March 21st around a GRC type tool that has the capability of ingesting OSCAL formats, also with API interoperability. That's obviously in your wheelhouse. I'm sure that may have crossed your path too in terms of opportunity, but that's what they're looking for. So to me, while we're looking for indicators of movement, I mean, the fact that that's already out and that's a request for quote, right? They're looking to potentially procure something, which they really haven't had to date. This program's been around for a really long time, and we have not had a tool from a workflow automation standpoint.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that one because I've had I know a lot of people inside of Hyperproof at least who've been very curious about OSCAL, and they think that it's the way of the future, and yet it seems to go in fits and starts. So how quickly do you think OSCAL is going to be adopted and then mandatory for both the initial submittal and then for continuous monitoring?
I think just like with AI, you're going to look at use cases, right? And I think the front end use cases are around accelerating the arduous process of a 500 to 1,000 page SSP, the ability for the FedRAMP PMO or the agency to review that within a reasonable time frame, having baked in automation for like validate. I know the FedRAMP PMO has looked at validation rules. So instead of human doing it, they're having the tool actually do that front end processing, which we're looking, in my view, we're looking for incremental success. I feel like in the automation world and doing things faster, let's take that low hanging fruit. I believe that all of this is going to start through the front end review process. And one other note on that, AWS submitted the first OSCAL FedRAMP package in June of 2022. So it's not that it hasn't been done.
That was a big deal.
Yeah. So it's, there's some first movers. They're encouraging in that. They're accepting, OSCAL format as well as Word and PDF. We want to get away from that eventually.
Yeah.
So I it's going to take, it's slow moving, but there's some indicators of success there. So.
Excellent. I certainly believe that if the government wants to meet the language of speed and efficiency that they're starting to put out there around FedRAMP, they're going to have to implement OSCAL. Now, we've already kind of beat this horse, right? The government doesn't move very quickly, but the fact of the matter is part of the reasons they don't move quickly is they're not automating in these areas. So again, I think a lot of this depends on whoever takes the chair, and maybe somebody's already taken the chair that runs FedRAMP, but that person should be driving some of these initiatives quicker. That's the opinion of a person that has to live in it. So
right. Yeah, and you raise a good point there, Tom. And I also want to ask James just about this, about kind of pivot the question, because we were talking about off-scale import, and some people would like to do it and they can't. We also talked about the difficulties associated with actually getting a sponsor. Are there other areas where you see CSPs struggle in achieving FedRAMP?
Yeah, this topic is near and dear to my heart. I've spoken to probably 2,000 CSPs in terms of, since the program started, and I've kind of aggregated, the domains of where people are struggling to a couple different areas. The first one is the cloud reference architecture. Think of like the FedRAMP, the federal mandates, a clearly defined boundary, external connections, multi-factor authentication, crypto for data at rest and transit, vulnerability management. Those are pretty clear cut, right? That is not an easy implementation, especially if you're having to retrofit the offering. If you have a greenfield and you're able to build, security, by design, that certainly has a different timeline associated with it. The other domain that is very important is the existing governance program within your organization. So are you a CSP that's just beginning to implement governance through FedRAMP and this is your first run? I actually feel for you if you're attempting that first, because it's a culture clash, right? Like this is a major culture clash. Nobody, when you're running at the speed of light and everybody's like, you need to slow down and we need people, process, and technology. They're like, you're breaking my company, man. This isn't good.
Yeah. It's a culture mismatch and it's a resources mismatch as well, I imagine.
Right.
That's when you bulk buy the book "Who Moved My Cheese," right? I mean, there's so many cases of how do we take a culture from freewheeling to controlled growth and controlled security. And the fact of the matter is, especially in the startup world, it's not an easy feat to move folks forward there.
Yeah, and if we pull on that thread a little bit, what does that also mean? That means that you need to have staff dedicated to supporting it, right? And it's not just FedRAMP, right? We're looking at, a lot of these cloud providers are looking between 6 to 10 accreditations, attestations that they have to do in a given year. So you really have to look at the internal impact. Do you have operational security roles defined? Do you have a CISO? Like, how much security staffing do you have already walking into the situation? And that's an indicator of success. The less you have, the less likely you are that you're going to be successful in it. And the last category that I think is extremely important and undersold is the sales organization. It's probably the most overlooked thing. And I get it. Like, everybody, when you struggle with moving forward and selling your offering, it's easy to point fingers at what's not working. And there's truth to that, right? There is problems with the program. But what I'm also finding after inspecting a lot of these categories a little bit more is the organization that was trying to go through FedRAMP didn't have a good business case, right?
Oh.
So hey, I've got this one opportunity. The salesperson screams at the engineering team, I need you to get this through. And Tom's like, great, this is another one I got to do. And not knowing the all-in investment. But, if that's the only deal that you have, I would go back to the drawing boards. Like, let's quantify what kind of business pipeline do you have, and is it good enough to actually go through us? Because FedRAMP is one of the highest cloud security standards out there. So it's not for the lighthearted, and certainly from an investment standpoint, it's a tough sell to leadership.
Yeah, I agree completely. The point about sort of the go-to-market piece of this, I would say, boy, if there's any company that does that well ahead of having FedRAMP complete, I'd be surprised. I mean, the sense that I get when I talk with other companies, certainly our size, but even much larger, is this is hey, we're going to build it and then see if they come, right? They're not thinking super proactively about the sales approach.
Field of dreams, right?
Yeah.
Yes, if you build it, hopefully they'll buy something.
By the way, I'm 40 minutes from Field of Dreams. If anybody's interested.
No way.
Really? Okay. We're definitely gonna have to do a field trip for you at some point. We will go out there and shoot this in a baseball field.
Good idea. That's good. That's a great idea.
And if you're enjoying this conversation on YouTube and at some point want to see Tom and I apparently go on a road trip that I just signed up for to go to Iowa, to go to the Field of Dreams, ring the bell to get notifications about my quest to find literally any beer that I enjoy, or alternatively subscribe to this in your podcast app of choice to make this part of your routine. So James, moving on, how do you really think that 3PAOs can enhance their assessments to better evolve the evolving threat landscape that cloud service providers currently face?
At the end of the day, like it's paramount that the 3POs invest in high quality talent. They have a good training track, making sure that people understand the hyperscale inheritance model. You understand AWS, Azure, all the infrastructure providers that a lot of the ISVs are on. You shouldn't have to teach them infrastructure, basic cloud, and the inheritance model. That's important. And at the end of the day, like it's lost my train of thought. There you go. Maybe we can recap that question again. And
threat landscape. So what is it that 3PAOs could do to enhance their assessments to really deal with our modern world and threat landscape that the CSPs are facing?
Gotcha. Yeah. So from a technical perspective, it's paramount that you're investing in high quality talent that understand the new technologies. You're keeping people trained up, very closely to that. One of the new requirements out of Rev 5 was red team exercise. And that does address the threat landscape from an organizational perspective, even outside of what the FedRAMP traditional pen test focuses on. Those are specific attack paths. This actually takes it a bit broader from an organizational perspective, which I think provides a lot more value to CSPs, holistically.
Well, and certainly it's a good thing that there's 3PAOs out there that can bring that sort of skill set to the table, because, Kane, you and I have both consulted at a number of companies. How many times have you seen a capable red team?
Yeah. When it's not a primary service offering of the company, very infrequently. I can think of a couple retail customers that I've had before that have got good red teams internally, but in general, that's something you buy, you don't build.
That's right. I see it very rarely. My brother's company is one exception to that. They may have the best red team outside of the government I've ever seen, but the reality is most companies are not looking at that as a wise investment. They're looking at it as a huge cost sink, and they're not investing in it. So finding a partner like Fortrim that has that capability, that's key.
Yeah, and I'd also say that it was also a bit of a surprise. One of the bigger material impacts for Rev 4 to Rev 5 was that cost. So when you're looking at red teaming, really focusing on the objectives, both internal and external, and making sure it's scoped appropriately to get the most value out of it. So that's definitely a way to address that.
Okay, cool. Well, that's good advice there. I also wanted to ask you about roles and responsibilities, and I was thinking about it. Like, there are multiple roles inside of a 3PAO, and they all do different things, like we just said, like red teaming. So, how do you see how those various roles and responsibilities inside of 3PAOs really help contributes to the trust and reliability of the cloud services that are being purchased by federal agencies?
Yeah, and we kind of touched on this a little bit in your previous question, but it's not easy to be 3PO. There's a lot of inspection. I mean, as much as, which I'm sure you're pretty happy to hear that. As a CSP, you're like, I'm sure you give quite the run for the folks that you assess. We have a fair amount of that as well, and a lot of training and a lot of things that go with that. But at the end of the day, like, it's really important that the technical training is invested in heavily. It's really important that you have a good relationship with the PMO and all the agencies, the JAB and others, to make sure that you understand how to navigate the gauntlet. Because there's a lot of unspoken things that get put out there, and it's our collective job to work together to figure out what the end result should be. But you need to understand the landscape well, so you know how to navigate.
Yeah, and certainly if you're walking into this thing without sort of the experience that a 3PO brings, you're going to run into trouble. The nice thing about a 3PAO is they've been through this battle a number of times, so you don't have to repeat the same, like, sort of war mistakes, right? They're gonna steer you around many of those pitfalls, and quite frankly, they know where the government is going to focus and can help you be shored up for those areas.
Yeah, and just thinking back on that moving at the speed of government comment from earlier, and I may borrow that phrase from now on. What about emerging technologies? Right? I mean, this is the year that you can't go through a conversation without talking about artificial intelligence or machine learning. Do those have any relevance right now for 3PAOs as well as their future role in FedRAMP?
I mean, I think back in my career, there's only one other time that I've seen the paradigm shift that's happening right now, and it's exciting and frightening all in the same motion. And from a cyber cat perspective, we should be looking at it very closely. I would say from a policy standpoint, FedRAMP follows the NIST, guidelines. There's a couple of publications that have come out. You have the NIST AI risk management framework. And my guess is it's to govern, map, measure, and manage, categories of AI, and trying to get boundaries or guardrails around that, and understanding the risk and how to measure it. I mean, ISO came out with 42001 as well. Me just being a practitioner of governance across the board, I like to look at all of the above. So we're tracking that. I would say that in general, with any new technology, NIST is going to go ahead and put out publications. They're going to put it out for public comment. FedRAMP PMO is going to ingest that. Whatever the new technology is, they're going to go ahead and look to evaluate it and try to put parameters, guardrails around it to ensure that we can measure it appropriately. So that's generally the process.
Right.
You're going to leave our listeners hanging if you don't tell us what the other technology that moved as quickly was.
Yeah, I'm wondering what it is myself. He's about to say metaverse. That's where my money is at.
Oh, I'm going to say virtualization. But what are you going to say, James?
I mean, just cloud in general. Yeah, I mean, virtualization. Yeah, it's happening so fast. And like for example, I went to an AWS workshop. We're pretty involved with them, and when they get up there and talk about generative AI and the use cases and the native stuff that they're developing and third-party partners, and they're telling you that it's happening so fast we can barely keep up with it. What does that tell you? You need to pay attention, and everything will be changing. So we're all watching it closely, and I think the process itself, there is a method to how it would be rolled out. When it gets rolled out, it probably won't happen as fast as AI is moving, I'm sure. But
well, I want you to, for our last question before we go to beer reviews, I want you to kind of pull up your crystal ball and talk to us a little bit about how you see the relationship between 3PAOs and CSPs evolving in the next few years to meet the demands of federal agencies more effectively.
Traditional assessments are, a 2 to 3 month point in time. If you think about continuous monitoring, I would evolve that into continuous validation. So as we're looking at it, one of the things that we're rolling out is FedRAMP, which is continuous validation of the controls and technologies over a period of time versus the point in time. Originally, when that concept was brought up, there was a lot of, well, does that mean you're going to be with me all year round? It really doesn't sound like a good idea. I don't know if I like that. So, it takes a lot to digest the comment, but if it's done in the right way, given the amount of volume of assessments that you need to go through, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Because if you can take that and normalize it and then identify the validations that you need to do on a continuous basis, it makes it more manageable from an organizational standpoint.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, if I were to look at what the future holds, the requirements for continuous monitoring and sort of the cadence that you're going to have with the PMO for the rest of your life under FedRAMP, you're going to start to look for ways that you can build efficiency underneath that sort of burden. And I think you're exactly right. So this is kind of a neat place where both of our companies meet, right? Because we automate much of the controls that are required for FedRAMP, and we need somebody to help assess on that. So that's for somebody like a Fortrium or or certainly a capable 3PAO can come in. So
Well, we don't just automate the collection though, Tom. We also automate the testing. And that's why I get excited, because as a CISO, I really just care, are the controls working? Because if a control's persistently shown to not be working, I'm going to use that in vendor negotiations. Whereas if a control is consistently shown to be working and there's proof to back it up, I feel really good when I talk about like renewals time when that comes up with a vendor, or if I have to go to a board presentation and say, how are things going? Well, it's a very quiet story if everything's operating and ticking along well. So I really like that idea, James, of continuous validation instead of continuous monitoring in the control space for FedRAMP. I do like that idea.
And the other thing to think about is, given the way that we're set up, we do sampling techniques, right? It's a small fraction of sampling, but what happens when you automate? You increase the assurance level. So you can raise the bar on security as a whole by a higher assurance validation. So instead of 10, 15, 20%, we're getting up to 50, 70, 80% assurance, if not higher. I'm not going to say that it's ever possible to get to 100%, but certainly that would be better than where we're at. So I would.
And also,
love
it means
to see
people
that.
aren't spending their time doing sampling, which having
Busy
trained many
stuff.
associate consultants, it's not the most exciting task to do.
100%.
Right.
Yeah.
But speaking of exciting things, this is when we move to our beer reviews. Tom, I see you've been sampling a little bit more of yours than I have. And because James suggested this beer, I tell you what, let's not have him go first, because I think he might persuade you and I in our ratings for this beer. Tom, I think I went first last time, so how about you have a go?
Sure. So I've had Fat Tire a number of times, so this is not a surprise to me. That should be an indicator that I like the beer. I was certainly surprised when I saw it, because I always thought of it as a darker amber beer, but it wasn't. I find the taste to be, really interesting in terms of for what it is. Right, it's not my normal hoppy beers. I'm a hoppy beer guy, but this one has caramely undertones. You taste the bread. It's got a little sweetness. It's not offensive, so there's not a something on the backside that makes you want to wash your mouth out, which a lot of beers like this actually have. So, I like this beer. I like it a lot. I'm going to give it a 7
out of 10. And James, that's an important detail. We do use a 10-point scale. So I will go next. So Tom's given it a 7 out of 10. I will say this is unlike a lot of the beers that we've had on the show. It's opened up over time. A lot of the beers that I have and just kind of ignore go flat. They don't have as much of a characteristic nose. This one's actually opened up a bit, which is surprising. I know that beer aeration is not a thing. We would not put this in my blender or in my aerator like you would wine. It does smell better. I'll have a go here and see. Actually, it tastes like less, though. It's kind of a weird side effect. Tom, I'm going with you. It's inoffensive. It has very little character other than like faint undertones of beer. I guess if you're like, is this like baby's first beer? Like if you want to start learning how to drink beer, maybe this is one you start with because it's a fairly.
Ultra. No, this is a much better beer.
I don't think we've had Michelob Ultra. Should we have that on the show? Is that a craft beer?
No, I can't put my money on that.
Okay, all right. Well, this is an inoffensive. I'll give it a 4 out of 10. Okay. It's definitely not a 1. But it's
for
also
your knowledge, James. That's a strong showing for Kane.
So, okay.
Fair.
All right, James. Tell us what your thoughts are.
Okay, so when we went through the exercise, I definitely wanted to pull a local brew. Bear Chase was not in time in terms of getting the local craft brew to you guys, so we went with more of a mainstream. I'm going to look at it in 2 ways. I'm a business guy, so I look at it 2 ways. I think it's a success story of the craft brew scene. It kind of put Colorado on the map in terms of craft brew. They've done a great thing and turned it into a global brand at this point. Yeah, exactly. So they did it in 25 years, so it's impressive that they got to the scale they did. From a taste standpoint, I tend to like the darker, hoppier type beer. So I think that while I did suggest the beer, I'm actually going to go a little bit below Tom and go with the 6.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So this is probably going to all round out to a 5.5. I'm guessing somewhere. If the math
Somewhere,
hard enough.
somewhere in that area.
All right. So it's kind of a middle of the road beer. Good to know.
Ah.
Well, with that, that's all for today. So if you think you know a beer I'd like, good luck with that, by the way. Or better yet, if you have a FedRAMP question, drop it in the comments below, and remember to like our LinkedIn and YouTube pages to hear live interviews with information security professionals.